Luca, Gentleman of the Emerald City, Book 1. Written by L.A. Witt. Narrated by Michael Ferraiuolo. Chapter 1. Ethan. The mood on the Seattle Breakers charter jet was about as bright as the rain-blackened Chicago sky outside. Thanks to the weather, our takeoff was delayed just like everyone else's, and God knew when we were actually getting out of here. A few of my teammates were talking quietly amongst themselves or on FaceTime with their families. In the seat in front of me, Grayson, our second-line right-winger, was obviously trying to sound upbeat as he talked to his kids. They were excited that he'd be home and not going back out on the road for a while. I had no idea how he did it, keeping that smile in place and sounding almost as enthusiastic as they were about an upcoming trip to Disneyland. Maybe he was that enthusiastic, and maybe that soothed the sting of our heartbreaking loss in the playoffs. A lot of the guys were family men, and for them, the end of the season meant the beginning of 3 months or so with their wives and kids. Even with the prospect of families and vacations, though, the vibe on the plane was pretty damn miserable. Kind of came with the territory of a season ending like that. I pressed my head back against the seat and stared out at the shitty weather and the congested tarmac. A plane took off. Another took its position on the runway. The others steadily moved forward. Eventually, it would be our turn. Closing my eyes, I sighed. As much as I wanted to be off this plane, I wasn't exactly in a hurry to get home. The chaos of the hockey season was what I lived for. The constant traveling, the intensity of the game, the pressure to win, I loved it all. It always ended eventually, though. Sometimes we went out on a high. We'd won the cup 2 seasons ago, and it didn't get any better than that. Sometimes we didn't make it into the playoffs at all, and sometimes we almost had it before things ended abruptly. Last night we'd been so close to hanging on to our spot in the semifinals I could taste it. Then their rookie defenseman got one of those 1-in-a-million goals that people would be talking about until long after he retired. I'd never really thought about what it was like to be on the other team when someone scored a legendary shot like that. Turned out, it really, really sucked. And on that demoralizing note, our season was over, and now I had to figure out what to do with myself. After 4 college and 9 pro seasons, you'd think I would have it down, but I never got used to this part. The lull, the quiet, the solitude. I lived and breathed hockey, and when there was no hockey except for casual practices and scrimmages throughout the summer, I was restless. No, not restless. I did get twitchy and bored, missing the constant stress and adrenaline. But the off-season for me was like winter for my sister, depressing and draining. For her, it was the cold and the lack of sunlight. For me, it was the lack of people and chaos. The lack of hockey and being constantly on the go. When everything stopped, there was nothing left but my quiet, empty condo and my cold, empty bed. I suppressed a frustrated groan and glared out the plane's window. That was it, wasn't it? The sudden stillness at the end of the season meant I couldn't ignore everything that was missing in my life. While my teammates went home to partners and kids, I went home to no one. Maybe it was time to do something about that. I dropped my duffel bag beside my suitcase in the condo's entryway. Unpacking and laundry could wait until tomorrow. On the other hand, it would keep me busy tonight, and maybe that would distract me from how twitchy I was in this empty place. But whatever, it could wait. Instead of being a responsible adult, I grabbed a quick shower, then flopped onto the couch with my phone to hunt down something, anything, a distraction, something to do, whatever. Tinder offered up plenty of temptation, but I was hesitant. I was one of 3 out players on the Breakers. Warner was married with kids. Me and Smitty, though, we were both single and we kept our dating and hookup habits out of the public eye as much as possible. That didn't stop the public from trying to dig up details, though. The handful of times I'd hooked up with someone on an app, I'd worried the entire time that he'd run to a tabloid or write a salacious blog post. It was also possible someone might see us, and that had happened before. Worrying about all that kind of took the fun out of casual sex, you know? And dating was just a massive headache because, as I'd learned from experience, once someone caught wind of a boyfriend, they'd be falling all over themselves to dig up details on him, regardless of how he felt about those details being discussed publicly. So, hookups were a gamble, dating was a nightmare. That left a conversation from a few months back worked its way into my brain. Wait, you're serious? I'd stared incredulously at Smitty. You pay for it? Why not? He'd shrugged. Skip all the hookup games, and the guys are way more discreet than anyone on Tinder. Huh. Discreet, really? Oh yeah, they're completely professional about everything. He'd paused, then smirked. Well, not everything, but you know what I mean. I'd been dubious of the idea back then. A prostitute? Sorry, an escort. That wasn't my style. But then again, some paid company was better than no company. And as the silence of my condo rang in my ears tonight, Smitty's argument sounded more and more persuasive. To hell with it. What did I have to lose? I could look. Didn't mean I had to buy. Rent. Book? Jesus, I didn't know how all of this worked. I didn't even know where to start. Since I couldn't come up with any other ideas, I texted Smitty. So, hey, that thing we talked about a while back, how did you find them? He didn't respond. Damn. Okay. Not that I'd expected him to be waiting on the other end for me to send him a message. I had just hoped he'd reply quickly so I wouldn't have to keep trying to find something to do tonight. While I waited for him to respond, I went into the kitchen to make something to eat. I wasn't particularly hungry, just bored. And of course, since I hadn't been home much in the last few weeks, I didn't have anything fresh. It was the second day of the off-season. A slightly freezer-burned Hot Pocket wouldn't kill me. As I was putting my plate in the dishwasher after I'd eaten, my phone buzzed. I picked it up off the kitchen island, wondering who was texting me, and then I remembered I'd messaged Smitty like half an hour ago. He'd replied, "Find what? You mean the guys I hire?" I wrote back, "Yeah." LOL, finally saw the light? Here's the app. Below that was a link to the App Store, and when I opened it, I gulped. Gentlemen of the Emerald City, the right men for your fantasies. That sounded, optimistic, but I downloaded the app anyway. I thumbed through all their policies, and I was more than a little reassured by the emphasis on discretion and safety. Our gentlemen provide professional and discreet services. GOTEC hires only the very best. Each gentleman is selected through a rigorous process and must meet our exceptional standards. He is screened for his health and yours, and he undergoes a thorough background check for your safety. Once hired, he is strictly bound by our policy of non-disclosure, leaving you free to enjoy everything your heart desires with total confidence. Similarly, GOTEC protects its gentlemen. Incidents of assault, extortion, threats, harassment, or other such behavior will be referred to the authorities without exception. That was surprising. As liberal as Seattle was, prostitution was still illegal. Though the website didn't actually come out and say that gentlemen were paid for sex, so maybe that was the loophole. The descriptions of services offered didn't actually include sex. I supposed this was like any escort service. The escort's companionship and possible role-playing were the service. If sex happened, it happened, but that wasn't technically what they were being paid for. It was probably something like how paying someone to have sex was illegal, but paying someone to have sex in front of a camera was making a perfectly legal porno. Well, whatever. They must have had all their ducks in a row if they were still operating and openly stated they'd report problem clients to the authorities. And Smitty had been happy with them. Nothing that I knew of had ever leaked to the press about him hooking up with an escort, and that was definitely something they'd have been all over. So maybe this whole thing was worth a try. As confident as I'd ever be that this wasn't a terrible idea, I moved from the company policies to the gentlemen themselves. They had profiles that were similar to Tinder profiles, some photos and details about their personalities. Their preferences in bed were tucked discreetly into words and phrases that could be interpreted as completely non-sexual. If what you crave is an evening without pressure, this gentleman's take-charge attitude will ensure you don't need to worry about making decisions. This gentleman's versatility means your time together is all about whatever you want. He'll be sure that no matter what, you come out on top. Some of it was corny as hell, but it was easy to read between the lines. I supposed it was part of keeping the company and the app legal. Icons noted where the various men landed in terms of price. No specific numbers were given, but they each had between 1 and 4 gold dollar signs. I wasn't too worried about the price. The league paid me quite well to chase pucks around, and I'd barely had time to spend much of it since the season started. I wandered through profiles, checking out photos and trying to get a feel for what various men offered and preferred. The photos weren't just bathroom selfies either. Clearly, Gentlemen of the Emerald City spared no expense when it came to showcasing its men. That, or they expected their men to spare no expense, either way, the result was some seriously high-quality photos of some exceptionally attractive men. Reading between the lines, some guys were definitely on the kinkier side. That wasn't really my thing, though I wasn't against things like blindfolds and handcuffs if I knew someone well enough, but probably not with a stranger I was hiring. A couple of the guys were sporting those really thick beards that were all the rage these days. Again, not my thing. I didn't mind facial hair, but too much got in the way. Oh, this guy is promising, I thought as I perused the profile of a green-eyed redhead with ink, freckles, and a wicked smile. I mused as I looked at another. I've never been with someone with a Prince Albert. Why do I feel like I've seen this guy before? I squinted at the photos. Well, I wouldn't mind seeing him again, so I added them to my favorites and kept looking. I was kind of amazed at just how many men were on their payroll. Was there really this much demand for high-end male escorts in Seattle? Or, well, the I-5 corridor, I guess, since despite the name implying it was only Seattle, aka the Emerald City, the available locations actually started as far north as Bellingham, which was just below the Canadian border, and they stretched to quite a ways south of Portland, Oregon. Either way, a lot of dudes for hire. I opened another profile, and the instant his photo appeared, my lips parted. Oh my God. The company's other gentlemen were all gorgeous, each in their own unique ways, but this guy? Whoa. He was white with a moderate tan and smooth abs. A short, dark beard emphasized a sharp jaw and full lips. His near-black hair was long on top and playfully tousled, and he had warm brown eyes I could have stared at all night, and that sly, knowing smile? Oh, Jesus. Below the photo was his name, Luca, and he had 5 gold dollar signs. I could see why. There was no telling what he was like in person, never mind in the bedroom, but I was already on board with ponying up whatever it took to find out. I continued through his profile. A lot of other gentlemen were tall, and several edged toward bodybuilder physiques, not shredded but definitely built. Luca was about 5'7", and he was on the leaner side. I'd known a guy in college who'd wanted to be an escort, a gigolo, actually, but he'd lamented that being on the north side of 6 foot was pretty much a non-negotiable requirement. Apparently, that wasn't the case for Luca, who so far seemed to be the highest dollar gentleman on the site. I didn't care about height anyway, and with Luca it barely registered beyond busting my college buddy's myth. And to hell with just putting him in my favorites. I did add him, but I didn't stop there, and my heart pounded as I tapped the Connect with this gentleman button. The next screen was a calendar showing when Luca was available. Tonight was out, but he had tomorrow evening open, so I grabbed that date. After entering a credit card and some basic information for the background check, I waited. Moments later, a message came through confirming that, assuming my background check came back clean, I would see Luca tomorrow evening. I put my phone aside and reclined on the couch. It was a little disappointing having to wait until tomorrow. Okay, so I probably wouldn't have been able to see him tonight anyway, since a background check would take some time, but still. On the other hand, something about knowing he was with someone else tonight was, what could I say? It was kind of hot. Or maybe that was just because I was imagining him naked, and there was a good chance he was naked right now. Maybe with someone's hands on him, someone's mouth on him. I wasn't usually a voyeur, but the thought of being able to see him now, watching him with whatever lucky bastard had snagged him tonight, yum. It was also a hell of a lot better than thinking about the fact that I'd be spending tonight alone. So I just kept my eye on the prize. Tomorrow night, I'd meet Luca, and maybe this off-season would get off to a less depressing start. Chapter 2. Luca. I pulled up in front of the apartment building in the university district and messaged the passenger that I'd arrived. She texted me that she'd be down in a few minutes. While I waited with my hazards blinking, I checked my messages on the Emerald City app. Naturally, I didn't have any. I hadn't in a while. What made me think that would suddenly change? I wasn't even showing as available tonight since I had a final tomorrow and wanted to do at least a little bit of studying and maybe even get some sleep. It probably wouldn't have mattered. My calendar on the website could have said, "Please hire me," in giant red letters, and I still wouldn't have gotten any messages. Sighing, I put my phone aside and stared out the windshield. I should have known this would happen, and maybe I did. Hadn't getting less escort work sort of been the point of jacking up my prices? Last semester, I'd taken a marketing class and I'd latched on to the scarcity principle and the concept of prices implying value. Like how slapping a $100 price tag on a t-shirt just because it had a certain brand name logo created its own demand. Because if it's that expensive, then clearly there's a reason for it. At the time, I'd felt so conflicted about working as an escort, so freaked out at the prospect of my family somehow finding out what I was doing, that I'd convinced myself all I had to do was jack up my prices to create the illusion that I was in high demand. Then I could make more money while seeing fewer men. As if the number of guys who'd paid me for companionship would make a difference in how my folks would react should my job ever land on their radar. Plus, maybe I would finally make enough money to get my head above water. Anita, the owner of Emerald City, had cautioned me against my stupid plan. If I priced myself too high, she'd warned, then I wouldn't get many clients at all. But that had just encouraged me. I'd insisted that was the point. Sure, I'd get fewer hits, but I'd still make more money because the clients I did pull would be paying more, a lot more. And then maybe I'd be able to sleep better at night because, if the worst happened, my parents might only find out I'd had sex with 20-odd guys for money instead of a few hundred. Yeah, that was working out. It totally explained why I was the most expensive gentleman on the site, but instead of playing Luca the escort, I spent most of my time as an Uber and Lyft driver, with a growing mountain of bills. Some of the other guys at Emerald City made enough to rent decent apartments in downtown Seattle. Meanwhile, my overpriced ass was renting a room in a split-level house in Montlake Terrace with 5 roommates. Does that sound like the life of a high-dollar man whore to you? Yeah, me neither. Leaning my head back against the seat, I sighed. Oh, whatever. At the end of the day, my bookings had dried up before I could get ahead, or even catch up, financially. I was broke, and the lack of clients was depressing as hell. Maybe it was time to bail on the whole escort thing. My conscience couldn't handle it when I was getting regular work, and my wallet couldn't handle it when I wasn't. At least if I quit, then I could ease up a little at the gym and actually eat a decent meal once in a while, instead of killing myself for this physique that no one wanted to pay for anyway. If I could ever afford a decent meal, that is. The backseat door opened, startling me, and a 20-something black woman slid into the back. "Sorry to keep you waiting." "Oh, I smiled as I tossed my phone aside and glanced at her in the rearview. "No problem. You're Sarah, right?" "Yeah." "Okay." I pulled away from the curb and headed downtown. Sarah was nice, as most of my passengers were, and we chatted on the way through Seattle. I dropped her off outside the restaurant where she was meeting friends. After she got out, I did a quick check to make sure she hadn't left anything in the car. Every once in a while, someone left a purse or dropped a wallet or phone, and I'd learned early on that it was a lot easier to check now than to get all the way home and realize I needed to come back. Sarah had taken all of her things, so I pulled away from the curb and rejoined the thickening traffic. Was there a game tonight? Baseball had started, and the Mariners were having a good season, so that usually meant traffic. At least it wasn't football season. The exodus after a Seahawks game was a nightmare. Hockey was over too, wasn't it? I thought I'd heard someone say the Breakers had lost in the playoffs this week. Not that I really followed hockey, though I did cringe a little now that the season was over. There was a player on that team who liked me, a lot. The feeling was not mutual, in the slightest, but my bank account said I wouldn't be turning him down if he pinged me. I wasn't looking forward to that. The payout? Yes. The company? Gugh. Once I was out of the worst traffic, I pulled over. I was technically in a parking space, but I didn't see any cops around, so I figured I could check my messages super fast before changing my mind about parking and pulling back out. As I picked up my phone, the push notification on the screen nearly made me shout. I had a message on Emerald City? Holy shit! I quickly opened it, fumbling my passcode on both the phone and the app before I finally got to the message screen. You have received a booking. Please confirm your acceptance. My heart sped up. I could already feel the preemptive relief of that sweet, sweet money landing in my bank account just in time to pay bills. Still, I cringed a little. It was Scott, wasn't it? That asshole hockey player? The season was over, so he was probably back in town, and he was rich enough that he probably wouldn't blink at my prices being higher than the last time he'd booked me. In fact, I'd just be a lot more available for him since no one else wanted to pay that much. Ugh, I did not think this through. Oh well, he needed sex and I needed money, fine. I opened the booking email, but the profile didn't belong to Scott. In fact, this was a new user. His card had gone through, which was promising. Some of these guys had eyes bigger than their credit limits. The background check was still pending, but it was pretty rare for those to get kicked back. I didn't know the specifics of what Anita had access to, but I'd heard more than once that felons and sex offenders flagged pretty fast. So if he hadn't been rejected yet, he'd probably be all right. At worst, I might get a "this guy did some time for nonviolent drug offenses, is that cool" message tomorrow. That happened every once in a while. Or, well, it had back when I'd gotten bookings more often than Halley's Comet passed the Earth. So I was eager to accept this booking, but since he was new to me and to the site, I wanted to look at his profile first. I tapped his profile. It was fairly sparse, which wasn't unusual. A lot of guys were paranoid about giving away some tidbit of information that would out them to the whole world, as if anyone ever saw their profiles besides the gentlemen they requested. Even admin didn't see profiles unless one of us reported them for having content that violated the terms of service, and there were very few things that met that criteria. If I rejected the booking, something I could do for any reason, including no reason at all, the client would be notified that I was unavailable, but no one would see his profile unless I flagged it. There was a place for us to leave comments that were visible only to other gentlemen. That was how we tipped each other off if someone was rougher than his profile let on, or if he had some obnoxious attitude that wasn't enough to get him blacklisted but warranted a heads up to anyone he hired in the future. I always checked those when I was booked by someone new. This client had just joined the app, though, so he didn't have any comments. From his profile, he seemed nice enough, a little vague, but he didn't set off any alarms. Looking for some company, not into anything particularly kinky, preferred if someone was willing to kiss on the mouth, good. Nothing made me feel dirtier than "I don't kiss whores on the mouth," Scott. Okay, this guy sounded all right on paper. Now, what did he look like? As most guys did, he'd uploaded a couple of photos. No face pictures, which was again not surprising. What he did show was sexy as hell, but something about his physique sent a prickle up my spine, and not a pleasant one. I mean, that wasn't an unusual reaction. I was a sex worker, and I wasn't a big guy. A client who was built like a brick shithouse could be dangerous. Any guy could be, especially if he had a weapon, but I had a healthy respect for physics. There was a reason we'd all been segregated by weight class when I'd wrestled in high school. It wasn't just that this guy was obviously big, fit, and strong as hell. There was something familiar about his build that raised the hairs on my neck. I shook myself and kept looking. I was just edgy because I'd had some questionable clients, and some of the passengers I picked up working as a driver made me suspicious of everyone. That was all it was. God, I can't wait to graduate college and find a job where I'm not worried about being robbed or assaulted, or my parents finding out what I was doing when I was robbed or assaulted. Shuddering, I continued through the client's profile. He was good-looking. I'd give him that. Obviously someone who kept himself fit, and he had some sexy ink. On his upper arm, he had an abstract tattoo. On the other, there was a design I couldn't quite see. Something jutted out in a way that was oddly familiar, but I couldn't place it, and it wasn't helping with that prickly feeling. Was I overreacting? Developing an itchy trigger finger when it came to clients? Associating him with a bad experience, even if I couldn't quite recall which bad experience it was? I swiped to the next photo. In this one, he'd turned, giving me an excellent view of his ass in a snug pair of jeans, and that was when the piece clicked into place. Blood turning cold, I stared at the photo and swallowed. The ass and thighs gave him away. This was a hockey player. The tattoo I hadn't quite been able to make out. It was almost identical to the one on another client's forearm, the Breakers logo. Ah, fuck. Not another hockey player. I closed my eyes and pushed out a breath. Not all hockey players were assholes. I knew this. The fact that I'd been with two, one being a semi-regular client, didn't mean they were all jerks, but twice bitten. It wasn't like I'd ever been assaulted by them or anything. Everything we'd done together had been consensual. They'd never been coercive or particularly abusive. They'd just absolutely never let me forget that I was a whore, a sex toy, a conduit between their fantasies and an orgasm. I always walked away from them feeling like I was dirtier than the money they gave me, and, rational or not, the experiences had left me with an aversion to hockey and the men who played it. So tonight, my first instinct was to reject the booking, but I hesitated. For one, I needed the money. I literally couldn't afford to be choosy. For another, just because this guy played hockey didn't mean he was an asshole like the other two. He could be perfectly nice. And he wasn't one of the other guys. And I mean, fuck. It seriously wasn't like I could afford to turn anyone away unless there was something horrifically wrong with his profile, like the guy who detailed some incredibly disturbing sexual fantasies and had proudly shown off his white supremacist tattoos. That dude was banned from Emerald City. But this client was just a hockey player. There was nothing threatening about him. All my alarm bells were because of guys who weren't him. The one guy was long gone, having retired and moved away. Scott was still an active player, someone this new dude undoubtedly knew, but that didn't mean they'd compared notes. I swallowed. At the end of the day, I was broke. I really, really couldn't afford to reject a client. So, with my heart in my throat, I tapped confirm booking, and I hoped like hell I was overthinking this. The email told me to take a specific parking space in the garage below the tall, gleaming condominium complex. Unsurprisingly, the car next to it was exactly the kind of car a highly paid professional athlete could afford. In this case, a sexy black Audi R8 sports car. I parked my decidedly less expensive sedan next to it. Emerald City preferred it if we had luxury cars of our own, but most of our clients were more interested in sex than an actual escort. Escorts who were hired by women were expected to look the part of a high-class gentleman, complete with designer clothes, top-of-the-line watches, and rides with six-figure price tags. Sometimes that was what male clients wanted, or sometimes they just wanted someone to go clubbing with them. More often than not, we could get away with not being as flashy and impressive as our counterparts, who mostly worked for women, which was good, because I did not have the budget to impress a pro athlete. Ignoring my nerves, I got out, and I paused to give myself a once-over in my reflection in the window. The suit was black with a dark gray shirt underneath, no tie, first couple of buttons undone, hair carefully arranged to look must. Then I headed for the elevator. He'd given me a code to enter, and when I did, the doors opened. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. As the car took me up to the 5th floor, I squared my shoulders and reminded myself to breathe. Just because I'd had a bad experience, repeated bad experiences, with hockey players didn't mean I'd have one with this guy. There's no guarantee I'll have a good experience either. I closed my eyes and exhaled slowly. That was part of this job. I loved what I did most of the time, when I was actually getting booked, but there were risks that I accepted every time I went to see a client. It was part of being an escort, same as possibly getting robbed was part of being a driver. The elevator dinged. Fuck. No more hesitation. I stepped out into a warmly lit hallway and followed it to the condo he'd said was his. At the door, I paused for another deep breath. Then I knocked. When the deadbolt clicked, I gulped, but by the time the door opened, I'd put on a smile. Not an overly bright one, nothing that would come across as phony, but enough to hopefully mask how nervous I was. On the other side of the doorway was a white guy who was definitely taller and broader than me, which I'd expected. His face wasn't hard on the eyes, that was for sure. He had an, I'll shave eventually, beard, kind of like mine, light brown hair that was long enough to curl, and a nose that I was pretty sure had been broken a time or two. He was definitely built like a brick shithouse, but he immediately gave me the impression that he was a teddy bear. His hazel eyes were soft, and his smile, hell, was he nervous? I was pretty sure he was. He cleared his throat. Luca? Yeah? You must be Ethan. He nodded and moved aside, gesturing for me to come in. I stepped into the condo. The click of the door behind me gave my pulse an uneasy surge, and when he turned the deadbolt, I jumped before I could tell myself not to. Ethan stiffened. Something wrong? My eyes flicked to the deadbolt, and his followed. Understanding seemed to dawn as he met my gaze. Would you prefer that it wasn't? I can leave it if... It's fine. I put on a hopefully convincing smile. It doesn't require a key to unlock from the inside, so it's all good. Now, if my heart would just slow down. His brow furrowed. I could see the questions in his eyes. Had someone locked me in without letting me leave? Was I afraid of him? I laughed and shook my head. Honestly, it's fine. I have to be cautious and protect myself, especially with new clients, but it's fine. Anita would have my head if she knew I'd said that much. We were supposed to project confidence and not insult our clients by even implying that we didn't trust them. I was halfway decent at reading people, though, and in the few seconds I'd been in Ethan's company, I had the impression that admitting to the reason I'd startled would go over better than if I tried to pretend it was nothing. And that was actually reassuring, that he was concerned. Ethan glanced at the door, then he turned the deadbolt again. No fanfare, no comment. Just a simple gesture that tacitly said I could leave at any time. My heart rate came down. Anything was possible, and I still needed to be cautious. But I already had the impression he was nothing like his present or past teammates. Thank you, I said softly. He smiled. Don't mention it. Neither of us spoke. He slid his hands into his pockets and avoided my gaze as we stood in the small entryway. After a moment, he laughed shyly and scratched the back of his neck. I've never done this before. You might have to take the lead. Do I offer you a drink, or... I laughed too, which unwound some of my nerves. You can, but I'm all right for now. And I don't drink when I'm on the job. Oh, right, that makes sense. Silence fell. Nervous, uncomfortable silence. Not unusual for someone who is new to hiring someone like me, so I grabbed the reins. I guess the question is, what do you want from this? Ethan met my eyes, forehead creased with unspoken questions. I shrugged. Some guys want company, some want to go straight to sex. Inclining my head, I quietly asked, what about you? He pressed his lips together, and the down-up look he gave me was surprisingly cute. Less of a leer and more appreciative? Considering how uneasy I'd been on the way in here, I was startled by how at ease I was with him already. Probably because he was so shy and nervous. Those weren't usually precursors to someone getting out of line. He met my gaze again. I'm not even sure, to be honest. I mean, sex, yes. The rest of it, some more shyness crept into his expression. I don't know how interesting I am, so you might get bored. I almost laughed, but his earnestness gave me pause. Did he not understand how this worked? This wasn't about me. He was the client. Whatever he wanted, that was what we'd do, whether it meant wild sex or playing board games all night. Beyond giving my consent, it didn't matter what I thought about it. Why else would I keep going back to his jackass teammate? But Ethan seemed genuinely concerned about whether he'd bore me if we just sat on the couch and talked. Did he have any idea how many clients had paid me for exactly that? Some guys were just painfully lonely, and at least prior to me jacking up my rates, plenty of guys had happily paid to have me hang out with them and talk about whatever. A lot of them never even took off their pants, or mine. I hooked my thumbs in my trouser pockets and shrugged again, trying to come off as casual and not dismissive. I'm here on your dime. This is all about what you want. Ethan swallowed. Oh. Silence hung between us. Wow, he really was shy. Some guys were, especially if they'd never hired someone like me before. And if experience had taught me anything, it was when to gently take the lead until they found their footing. So I stepped a little closer and grinned up at him. Maybe conversation can wait until we've broken the ice? His eyebrows rose. You think so? Worth a try. I trailed a fingertip along his arm, stopping just under the edge of his t-shirt sleeve, pretending not to recognize or even notice his breakers tattoo. Sometimes it's easier to think clearly after an orgasm or two. Ethan's lips parted. Oh, maybe. I narrowed my eyes and closed some of the remaining space between us. That is at least part of why you hired me, isn't it? It was never stated explicitly in electronic interactions, but it was usually why we were hired, and it was never a bad idea to make sure we were on the same page. Yeah, Ethan sounded out of breath. Yeah, definitely. I slid a hand up his chest, trying not to get distracted by the well-defined muscles underneath his shirt. So tell me, what do you like? He closed his eyes as my thumb crested his hard nipple. A lot of things, he shivered hard, planting his palm against the wall as if he needed the support. Haven't been touched in a long time. No? Haven't had time. And his eyes lost focus, then he shook his head. I'm on the road a lot. Makes it hard to connect with people. Hockey? Ethan jumped. How did you know? Well, the tattoo. I nodded toward the black and yellow ink peeking out from beneath his sleeve. And from your photos. I laughed softly, trying to sound like I didn't have issues with men who played his sport. Hockey players have a pretty distinctive physique. He laughed, and I'll be damned if he didn't blush. Yeah, the sport is great, but it would be nice to be able to buy pants off the rack. I'm sure, but I winked. At least from where I'm standing, the results are worth it. Oh yeah? What can I say? I appreciate a great set of thighs and a nice ass. Ethan bit his lip. I inched closer, sliding my hand around to his back. That ass looks good in jeans. I'm curious how it looks without them. He laughed softly, and as he rested a cautious hand on my waist, he said, I have to say, that's a pickup line I haven't heard before. Is it really a pickup line when I'm already here? His laughter vanished, and the shyness came back. His fingers twitched on my waist. I'm glad one of us is direct. Just breaking the ice. I closed that last bit of space between us, letting our hips brush. He gasped, and I almost did too. Nerves be damned, he was fully hard. Lifting my chin enough to hint that I wanted him to kiss me, I murmured, Any limits I should know about? He lowered his chin, and his breath whispered across my lips. Not really? I mean, kink isn't really my thing. Same. He wrapped his arm around me. What about you? I moistened my lips. I don't bottom. That wasn't true, but I never told clients that I only bottomed for men I was dating. That just invited clients to try to insinuate themselves into my life enough to qualify as a boyfriend long enough to top me. As far as clients were concerned, I was a top. End of story. Ethan just nodded. Right, your profile said you're a top. And you're good with that. He grinned, eyes flicking to my mouth. I booked you after I read your profile, didn't I? Yeah, you did. I pushed myself up on the balls of my feet, just letting our lips brush. And I love kissing on the mouth. Thank God for that, he whispered, and then he kissed me and... Holy fuck. Clients didn't kiss me like this. Hell, boyfriends didn't kiss me like this. The teddy bear impression was more on the money than I'd realized. He gently wrapped me up in his arms, and his lips were soft and tender against mine. I didn't read anything into it. This was probably just the way he liked to kiss, but oh God, I loved it. Draping my arms around his neck, I indulged in a low moan as I opened to his politely probing tongue. And as he deepened the kiss, I actually got that weak-in-the-knees feeling that I never had while I was getting paid. Why didn't more men kiss like this? He broke the kiss and touched his forehead to mine. Fuck. I haven't done that in way too long. Neither have I. But I didn't say that out loud. Instead, I went with, well, feel free to do it again if you want to. A soft breath of laughter warmed my lips an instant before he did do it again, and I held on as he kissed me, the way people didn't usually, or at least in my experience, kiss prostitutes. Experimentally, I kissed him harder, and he responded with a quiet groan. His hips moved slightly, his thick cock brushing against me, and he shivered. Without breaking the kiss, I slid a hand between us, and Ethan's whole body tensed as I cupped him through his pants. He rocked into my hand, thrusting against my palm, and I rubbed back. Whatever shyness he'd had a moment ago was gone now, or at least fading. He wanted this, no doubt about that. With a gasp, he lifted his head and looked in my eyes. He was breathing hard, so was I. Is it too soon to suggest going into the bedroom? He panted. Grinning, I shook my head. Not at all. Thank God. Then he took me by the hand and led me down the hall.